She was only 11 years old and arrived at the hospital to give birth. During delivery, the doctors panicked at what they discovered. In the early 1990s, in a small town hidden in the mountains of India, life flowed at its own pace. Peace embraced that corner of the world, where the rustling of the wind in the trees and the chirping of birds replaced the chaos of big cities. It was in this village that Giovanna, an 11-year-old girl full of energy and dreams, lived. Alongside her parents, Heitor and Denise, she enjoyed a routine that many would consider monotonous, but to her, it was perfect. Heitor, a quiet farmer, tended to a small garden in the backyard, while Denise devoted herself to the home, ensuring that Giovanna had a happy and safe childhood. The town was made up of houses with thatched roofs and dirt roads, where dust rose whenever the wind blew. The neighbors had known each other forever and formed one big family, always supporting one another. Mornings started early, with the ladies chatting in the central square, and the afternoons were filled with the laughter of children running freely through the cobblestone streets. Giovanna, in turn, was always seen with her two best friends, Daniel and Julia. Together, the three explored every corner of the small town, creating adventures and enjoying the freedom of that special place. Thus, Giovanna's days were always marked by small joys. With Daniel and Julia, she would run through the open fields where the tall grass brushed against their legs and visit the stream that ran through the town, her favorite spot. The best friends would dive into the cool waters, laughing and splashing each other, while the scorching sun of India illuminated their faces. The simplicity of that life seemed to guarantee that nothing bad could happen there. With each sunset, the whole village seemed to be enveloped in an absolute tranquility, as if it were protected from any harm the world could bring. In their daily life, Heitor and Denise taught Giovanna values they considered essential: kindness, respect, and the importance of caring for those she loved. These lessons, shared over meals and conversations by lantern light, were the legacy that Heitor, an honest and hard-working man, and Denise, a caring and loving mother, wanted to pass down to their daughter. They dreamed of watching her grow into a strong and generous woman, able to face challenges with the same calmness and simplicity that shaped life in the village. Giovanna was happy. She felt safe and loved, surrounded by the care of her parents and the loyal company of her friends. Her childhood was filled with laughter, play, and the certainty that this place would always protect her. The village was more than a home. It was a piece of paradise where time seemed to pass slowly, respecting the natural rhythm of life. Heitor and Denise formed a couple that radiated harmony. United by a love built on simplicity, they had chosen to live humbly, in perfect tune with the modest life of the countryside. Heitor, with a face weathered by the sun and calloused hands, dedicated himself to cattle raising and rice production, a trade passed down through generations, as well as carefully tending to the small garden in the backyard. There, between rows of vegetables and herbs, grew food that would sustain his family. Every morning, as he observed the plants he cultivated with patience, Heitor felt proud of what he could provide for Denise and Giovanna. The work was not easy, but he faced it with the calm of someone who understands the value of every fruit harvested. His wife, Denise, was a woman with a generous heart who dedicated her time to the home and the well-being of their daughter. Always attentive to Giovanna's growth, she worked hard to ensure the girl was raised in a safe and loving environment. Denise spared no effort to make sure her daughter had everything she needed to live with joy and dignity. Whether preparing meals or mending clothes, she did everything with genuine love, feeling grateful for every moment shared as a family. The bond between Heitor and Denise went beyond romantic love. It was a partnership that withstood hardships and celebrated small victories. Between them, there was mutual trust, built on respect, and the determination to support each other no matter what. During tough times, when work was scarce or the harvests fell short, they found comfort in one another, reminding themselves that they would face everything together. In the small joys, like the healthy growth of their plants or Giovanna's laughter while playing in the backyard, they were also side by side, sharing the satisfaction they found in the life they had built together. A few years ago, Giovanna attended the village's only school, where she continued her journey of learning and friendships. Her enthusiasm for learning was contagious, and her friends, Daniel and Julia, were always by her side during school activities and adventures after class. At school, Giovanna thrived amidst laughter and games, while also soaking up the lessons from her teachers, who nurtured the village's children with the same care Heitor put into his work in the fields. The villagers, inspired by Heitor and Denise's example, held a special affection for the family. The couple was seen as a model of unity and honesty, qualities that everyone respected and admired. Their home was a haven of peace and kindness, where friends and neighbors knew they would always be warmly welcomed. Heitor and Denise's generosity, always ready to help anyone in need, had won the hearts of everyone in the village. In return for their kindness, they were met with the affection and respect of the entire community, becoming one of the most beloved and esteemed families in the area. Life was simple, yet deeply meaningful for them. Suddenly, Giovanna's peaceful routine was disrupted by an alarming mystery. It started subtly, with small changes in her body that Heitor and Denise initially attributed to their daughter's natural growth. However, as the weeks passed, they noticed her belly seemed to grow larger each day, in a way that didn't align with the usual changes of childhood. Still, they tried not to assume the worst, believing it might just be a nutrition issue. Concerned, Denise started preparing more nourishing meals, filled with fresh vegetables from their garden and homegrown produce, hoping it would help their daughter recover. Even so, Giovanna's discomfort only grew worse. She experienced occasional pain, and her energy seemed to fade. Heitor and Denise, increasingly anxious, had quiet discussions, exchanging worried glances as they watched their daughter try to carry on as usual. Though Giovanna made an effort to play with her friends and help around the house, she was noticeably weaker and more tired. One day, after seeing Giovanna stop mid-play with Daniel and Julia, clutching her stomach with a pale face twisted in pain, Heitor and Denise knew they could no longer ignore it. They decided to take her to the town's only doctor, Dr. Lillian, a seasoned and compassionate woman, highly respected by everyone in the community. The appointment was tense. Dr. Lillian carefully examined Giovanna and asked questions about her health and daily life, while Heitor and Denise waited anxiously, holding each other's hands tightly. To rule out any serious issues, the doctor ordered a series of tests that would take a few days to analyze. During the wait, Denise stayed by her daughter's side, trying to comfort her, even though her heart was consumed by fear of what they might uncover. When the results finally arrived, the shock was devastating. With a serious face and a heavy expression, Dr. Lillian called the parents into her office for a private conversation. After reviewing the papers briefly, she took a deep breath and said, "Giovanna is approximately 4 months pregnant." Heitor and Denise felt the ground collapse beneath them. The news seemed impossible, absurd. Giovanna, their 11-year-old daughter, pregnant. Both sat in stunned silence, struggling to process the revelation that would forever alter their lives. With tears welling up, Denise held her daughter's hand tightly, searching her frightened eyes for some kind of explanation. Heitor, in a state of shock, stared blankly ahead, as if willing himself to wake from a nightmare. Their safe, predictable world, where every detail of life seemed within their grasp, was crumbling in the face of a situation no one was prepared to handle. It didn't take long for the news of Giovanna's pregnancy to spread through the town like wildfire. At first, the townspeople were incredulous. Giovanna was a quiet, well-behaved girl, always surrounded by family and friends. But as the truth settled, whispered rumors turned into outright shock. Every conversation in every corner of the town revolved around the same question: who could be the father? In time, doubt gave way to suspicion, and sadly, the once friendly gazes of neighbors now carried judgment and accusations. The rumors quickly grew, and with little information to go on, suspicion inevitably fell on Heitor. Soon the local police were called, launching an investigation that further shook the delicate balance of the family's life. The possibility that Giovanna's own father could be involved was a devastating blow to the community. Heitor, once a respected and honest man, now endured judgmental glances wherever he went. Under mounting pressure from the townspeople, the police decided to take Heitor in for questioning. The news sent shockwaves through the village. Denise was desperate. She rushed to the police station, pleading passionately with the officers. He would never do such a thing. Her words, however, seemed to fall on deaf ears. Giovanna, still trying to comprehend the whirlwind around her, clung to Denise's hand, begging for her father's release. But the officers, bound by procedure and lacking concrete answers, kept Heitor in custody. The town was torn. Those who had known Heitor for years and refused to believe the accusations stood by Denise and Giovanna, offering support and comfort. Yet many others, swayed by suspicion and the scandal, began avoiding them, as if their presence was a reminder of the shame that now hovered over the village. Neighbors who once frequented their home or chatted cheerfully in the square now averted their gazes and passed by silently, murmuring among themselves. Inside the jail cell, Heitor was living a nightmare. The injustice of the accusation gnawed at him relentlessly. "I'm innocent. I would never harm my daughter," he cried to anyone willing to listen, his voice heavy with pain. But his words seemed to carry no weight. Fellow inmates looked at him with disdain, bombarding him with cruel remarks. Each passing moment felt like an eternity, and the agony of being away from Denise and Giovanna, unable to protect them from the humiliation, only deepened his suffering. The days in prison dragged on, each one worse than the last. Heitor's reputation, once untarnished, now seemed irreversibly stained. The other prisoners treated him as if he had already been found guilty. Some openly threatened him, muttering, "A man like you deserves to suffer," while others shoved him or hurled insults like daggers. "Disgusting criminal," they sneered, their words cutting deeper than any physical blow. Heitor's nights were the worst. Alone in the darkness, the weight of his sorrow bore down on him. Silent tears streamed down his face as he thought of Denise and Giovanna. The image of his daughter's innocent smile was both his torment and his solace. It reminded him of what he was fighting for, but also intensified his despair at being unable to protect her. Despite everything, Heitor clung to a fragile hope. He repeated to himself, almost like a prayer, "The truth will come out." It was this belief, this sliver of faith, that kept him from succumbing entirely to the despair. Each day, he endured the torment, holding on to the hope that soon justice would prevail and he could return home to his family, free from the cloud of suspicion that had engulfed their lives. Meanwhile, the once close-knit village was now consumed by judgment and distrust. Denise struggled to stay strong, but with each passing day, the weight of the situation grew heavier, shaken by how people were treating her. Though a few friends continued to offer support, it wasn't enough to ease the sting of betrayal she felt, as those she once considered close turned their backs on her family. Heitor's imprisonment was an open wound, slowly eroding the peace that had once defined her life. At home, Denise wrestled with a whirlwind of emotions, trying to stay calm for Giovanna's sake. The image of Heitor being taken away by the police replayed endlessly in her mind, and the silence that now filled the house echoed his painful absence. Deep in her heart, she was certain of her husband's innocence, but the weight of the accusations from the neighbors made the daily struggle almost unbearable. Once close and supportive, the neighbors now whispered behind her back or gave her questioning looks. Denise felt each of these actions like a stab to the heart. People she once shared laughter with now gazed at her with disdain, or worse, suspicion. "How can you defend a man like that?" some dared to ask, challenging her to justify what they saw as an unforgivable mistake. In those moments, Denise felt her heart tighten, but she never let her pain show. She kept her gaze steady and her expression calm, holding firmly to her belief in Heitor's innocence, even as nearly everyone around her thought otherwise. In addition, the daily routine with Giovanna was a mix of solace and anguish. Denise tried her best to give her daughter attention and comfort, but the girl could sense the tension in the air. Although confused by everything that was happening, Giovanna was the reason Denise refused to completely break down. Taking care of her and shielding her from the judgment of others became her daily mission. Every time she looked at her daughter, Denise felt even more determined to find a way to prove Heitor's innocence and restore her family's dignity. Amid this chaos, Dr. Lilian, who had always been supportive, proposed a possible path to the truth. During a visit to assess Giovanna's health, Lilian gathered her courage and suggested a paternity test to be conducted once the baby was born. "I know this won't ease the pain right now," she said in a calm tone, "but the test could be the key to putting all the doubts to rest once and for all." The idea sparked a glimmer of hope in Denise. If that test could prove what she already knew in her heart, perhaps it would be enough to calm the storm and bring Heitor back home. Denise clung to this possibility, fully aware that the road ahead would be long and difficult. Even so, the promise of a future free from doubt brought her a small sense of relief. Giovanna found herself consumed by a growing confusion that weighed heavier on her with each passing day. For an 11-year-old girl, the sudden changes in her body and her life felt like a painful and frightening puzzle. She didn't understand why her belly kept growing, nor could she grasp why her father had been taken away so abruptly. Denise, in her attempt to shield her from cruel questions, kept Giovanna at home, away from her friends and the games she once loved so dearly. On those lonely days, the longing for Julia and Daniel ached deeply in her heart. Feeling lonely, Giovanna began spending her days by her mother's side, helping with light activities like cooking and sewing. Denise tried to distract her with these tasks, keeping her close, but with every stitch sewn or recipe prepared, Giovanna couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible lurked behind it all. In moments of silence, her mind returned to the questions that haunted her. "Mum, what's happening to me? Why is my belly growing like this?" she would ask, her eyes filled with anxiety and uncertainty, searching for answers that never came. Fearing the impact the truth might have on her daughter, Denise hesitated to reveal it. She didn't want to burden Giovanna further and dreaded that explaining the pregnancy and the suspicions surrounding Heitor would cause even greater pain. Instead, Denise spoke of a potential health issue that would soon be resolved with Dr. Lilian's help. These vague answers only deepened Giovanna's confusion, making her feel increasingly like a prisoner in her own home. For Giovanna, the nights were even worse. She would wake up crying, gripped by a pain she couldn't fully understand, and a deep fear of something she couldn't quite define. Her body felt foreign, as if something beyond her control was taking over her own skin. Denise comforted her as best she could, holding her tightly and promising that everything would be okay. Yet deep down, both knew that those words of reassurance were far from enough. Months later, the long-awaited day of the birth finally arrived, and the town felt like it was holding its breath. Outside the small hospital, a crowd had gathered, buzzing with tension. Faces were a mix of curiosity and nervousness, and whispers spread like wildfire through the group. Everyone seemed frozen in anticipation, waiting for answers to the mystery that had surrounded Giovanna and her family for months. All eyes were fixed on the hospital entrance, as if the truth about what happened was a burden they all carried together. In prison, Heitor was consumed by anguish. He could barely sit still, pacing back and forth in his cell, his heart heavy with worry. Knowing that Giovanna was about to go through something so delicate and that he couldn't be by her side was an unbearable torment. He longed to be there, holding her hand, offering the comfort and support she so desperately needed. "If only I could be there to see the truth finally come out," he muttered to himself, clinging to the hope that this day might somehow reveal his innocence and put an end to the nightmare he was living. Inside the hospital, Denise and Giovanna were greeted by Dr. Lilian, whose expression was serious and focused. She had prepared everything for the cesarean, assembling her team and all the necessary equipment, but a quiet tension seemed to accompany her every move. Without fully understanding what was about to happen, Giovanna looked around with frightened eyes, clutching her mother's hand tightly. Even with her heart restless, Denise tried to appear calm, gently stroking her daughter's face and whispering, "We're here, my love. This will all be over soon." Though deep down, she wasn't certain what awaited them. As Giovanna was positioned for the procedure, Lillian approached for a final check, examining the young girl with extreme care. Each touch and observation was deliberate as she remained deeply focused on her work. However, as the examination progressed, something began to catch her attention. Narrowing her eyes, the doctor carefully studied Giovanna's body, her expression shifting. Suddenly, in a decisive move, she asked everyone to step back. Silence immediately filled the room. The tension was so heavy it seemed to press down on everyone. Denise glanced around, unsure, while Giovanna, lying down and still confused, watched Dr. Lillian's incredulous expression. The doctor appeared stunned, as if confronting something entirely unexpected. After several minutes of thorough inspection, Dr. Lillian stepped back slightly, took a deep breath, and with a look of disbelief that hinted at something unexplainable, she announced, "There's no baby here." The words echoed through the room like thunder. Denise's eyes widened, a mix of relief and disbelief washing over her, while the other doctors and nurses exchanged bewildered looks, unable to grasp the meaning of what they had just heard. Giovanna, still confused, stared at the ceiling, trying to understand what those... After the initial shock, Denise could barely process what she had just heard. Her head was spinning, and disbelief washed over her. "What do you mean? There's no baby?" Her words came out in a trembling whisper, and the look she gave Dr. Lillian was full of desperation and confusion. After all, everything that had happened up to that point seemed to revolve around that pregnancy that had rocked her family and shattered their peaceful life. She searched the doctor's eyes for any sign of understanding or an explanation that could make sense of the situation. Still visibly shaken, Doctor. Lillian tried to gather her thoughts. She too was surprised and unsettled, as if all her medical certainties had vanished before her eyes. Knowing that an answer was crucial, she quickly decided to perform an emergency ultrasound. This was essential to clarify what was really happening with Giovanna and to confirm, beyond any doubt, that there was no child there. As the exam was being conducted, the heavy silence in the room heightened the tension. Denise stayed by her daughter's side, holding her hand tightly and praying that this wouldn't be another nightmare for the family. Giovanna, still not fully understanding, tried to find some peace in her mother's eyes, but Denise's face reflected all the anguish she was feeling. Finally, the images on the monitor revealed the truth clearly and surprisingly. There was no baby. Instead, what was in Giovanna's belly was a large amount of accumulated fluid, something that explained the visible bloating and the changes in her body. The revelation was a shock to everyone in the room, who fell into complete silence, trying to process the magnitude of the mistake that had been made. Then, Denise brought her hand to her mouth. How could this have happened? How could such a serious mistake occur, and what was really going on with her daughter? Dr. Lillian, recovering from the initial shock, explained as calmly as she could. "What we're seeing here is a buildup of fluid, not a pregnancy." The doctor's voice carried a tone of apology, as if she wanted to make up for all the suffering this family had endured. After a pause, Dr. Lillian suggested the only reasonable option: Denise should take Giovanna to a larger hospital in the city, where more detailed tests could be done. There, they could finally understand what was causing the swelling and put an end to the mystery that had affected them so much. With a gentle touch on Denise's shoulder, the doctor reassured her that the situation could still be resolved, that Giovanna would receive the necessary treatment, and that the truth would soon come to light. For Denise, although relief was present, the weight of what they had endured still felt suffocating. The doubts remained, but now a new hope emerged, the possibility of reclaiming the life she had longed for. With one last look of gratitude and a promise to seek all the answers they needed, Denise prepared for the next step. The following morning, Denise and Giovanna set off toward the nearest big city, carrying a mix of hope and apprehension in their hearts. The journey was silent, both of them lost in thoughts about what could be behind the unexplained swelling that had caused so much pain. Upon arriving at the hospital, Denise felt a bit more at ease as she saw the modern facilities and the medical team, who immediately began performing the tests requested by Dr. Lillian. Each procedure was carried out with precision, and patience became a quality both of them had to cultivate while waiting for definitive answers. The hours that followed seemed to drag on, but finally, the test results were ready. The doctor who had been attending to them called Denise in for a private conversation and, with a compassionate tone, explained what the tests revealed. Giovanna was suffering from a parasitic infection known as schistosomiasis, commonly referred to as water belly. The parasite, which had likely infected Giovanna during her innocent play in the village creek, caused the retention of fluid in her abdomen, giving the impression of pregnancy. Denise breathed a sigh of relief, but also felt a deep sadness, realizing that something as simple as swimming in the village creek had caused so much suffering for her family. "So that's why she swelled up like that?" she asked, trying to confirm every detail. The doctor nodded, explaining that schistosomiasis is a disease that can have severe symptoms if left untreated, especially in areas with poor sanitation. Denise immediately understood that the problem wasn't just with her daughter but with the entire village, and a silent fear for the health of other children there began to settle in her heart. With the results in hand, Denise and Giovanna returned to the village, now certain that the swelling was nothing more than an infection, albeit a serious one that could be treated. Upon arriving at the local hospital, Denise went straight to Dr. Lillian's office to confront her. As soon as Denise entered, the doctor noticed her determined expression and welcomed them both, feeling the weight of the guilt for what she was about to confess. Shaken, Dr. Lillian began to explain what had really happened. "Denise, I owe you and Giovanna a deep apology," she said, her voice trembling with regret. "We discovered that, in the first test, a nurse accidentally swapped the blood samples, and that's what led to the incorrect results, indicating a non-existent pregnancy." Her words were full of pain, and Denise stood frozen for a few moments. That simple mistake had shattered her life, sent Hayter to prison, and exposed the family to a situation none of them should have had to endure. Lillian continued, explaining that the hospital recognized the seriousness of the mistake and was committed to offering support and compensation for the pain and suffering caused to the family. With a choked voice, she said, "If I could go back in time, I would do everything I could to prevent this from happening. The blame isn't on you, and I'm deeply sorry for what you've gone through." For a moment, Denise allowed herself to be overcome by sadness, feeling the weight of every word. The image of Hayter in prison, Giovanna scared and isolated, everything flooded her mind in a torrent of painful memories. Even with the sorrow, Denise took a deep breath and accepted the apology. For her, what mattered now was healing Giovanna and bringing Hayter back home. The emotional wounds would take time to heal, but finally, a light of justice was beginning to emerge amidst the darkness that had consumed their lives. Soon after the truth was revealed, Hayter finally breathed a sigh of relief as he left the cold walls of the prison behind. The feeling of freedom was even more intense with the warm reception from Denise and Giovanna, who eagerly awaited him with tight hugs and tears in their eyes. His return meant more than just the end of an injustice. It marked the return of a life interrupted by a devastating mistake. Then, the news of his innocence quickly spread throughout the village, and many of the townspeople, ashamed for having judged without evidence, approached the family to offer sincere apologies. Though still marked by pain, Hayter and Denise responded with understanding, recognizing that fear and misinterpretation had caused the community to act hastily. The hospital, aware of the damage caused, offered financial compensation that provided the family with the opportunity to start over. Hayter and Denise used part of the money to ensure Giovanna received proper treatment, and under appropriate medical care, she fully recovered within a few weeks. The young girl returned to being the healthy and cheerful child she had always been, enthusiastically resuming her routine. She could now go back to school, play freely with Daniel and Julia, and enjoy her childhood that had, for a time, seemed lost. Soon, Giovanna's situation touched the village in ways few could have imagined. Her case brought to light health and sanitation issues that had been previously ignored, especially concerning the risks of waterborne diseases from the creek. Inspired by Giovanna's experience, the villagers came together to improve their surroundings, organizing campaigns to clean the creek, build septic tanks, and raise awareness about hygiene practices. The small town became a true example of unity and solidarity, and Heiter's family's story became a lesson in empathy and collective responsibility. Over time, life returned to normal, but the experience left a deep mark on everyone. Heiter and Denise, now stronger from the struggles of the past, found support in each other to overcome the pain. The town, now more aware, became a more welcoming place. The villagers, once quick to judge, learned to value respect and understanding, recognizing the importance of not jumping to conclusions. For Giovanna, the simplicity and joy of her childhood were restored, and she grew up surrounded by the love of her parents and friends, who now saw her story as an example of resilience. Marked by their strength, the family returned to living in harmony, surrounded by a town that had learned the most valuable lesson of all: the importance of embracing and supporting one another, especially when fear and uncertainty seem overwhelming. Thus, the story of Heitor, Denise, and Giovanna touched everyone's hearts, leaving a legacy of unity and a love that survived all obstacles, transforming their surroundings into a more just, understanding, and welcoming place.